Hey Worldlings, I'm Brenna, and today we're going to take you guys through a complete crash course of Imperial China and maybe a little sneak peek at Imperial England. And this is what happens when you do a live recording. So, let's get started. Guys, where's my sign? There we go. So, what's your favorite snack? Mine is probably yogurt-covered pretzels, and that wouldn't be possible without a little thing called industrialization. So thank goodness for industrialization, am I right? I mean, who doesn't love yogurt-covered pretzels? So, once upon a time, there was a place called China and a place called England, just like in any normal fairy tale. China was a booming society and was constantly making innovative discoveries that we still use today, like gunpowder and the compass. And then the Qing dynasty came along. And everything went to crap. Say that, guys? I mean, who's working on the script back there? Hello? So anyway, after that little script mishap, sorry about that. So basically, China stopped trading with other people and their communication with other societies went way down. And I'm talking way down. They would export a little bit, but they barely imported anything. So like either Chinese way or the highway. At the same time, peasants and farmers were highly valued, but they were extremely fed up with the government because they were having to deal with things like famine, drought, high taxes, corrupt systems, floods. It was basically everything was crumbling down around them, and they needed someone to blame. At the same time, the Chinese were strongly against capitalism, which is where you have your private business owners. And they thought that if they funded it, then it would give crazy radical European politicians a voice, which of course Confucian China didn't want. Again, Chinese way or the highway. So then the British came along and
Brenna's a little tied up at the moment, so you're just gonna have to stick with me for a little bit. So then the British came along and the opium trade began. China would export goods from Europe, and Europe would import illegal opium to China from India. Then China started rapidly changing and became way more industrialized. The Taiping Rebellion was brought about in an attempt to stop the reforms that are going on in China and called for abolition of private property, prohibition of foot binding and concubinage, free public education, literacy for the masses, and many more. After the first Opium War, you guessed it, there was a second Opium War. And who won again? The British.
So in this nice little fairy tale where we opened up with England and China and France and all that stuff, along came this little country called Portugal, which is really small. They didn't have a whole lot of manpower. They were kind of like the underdogs here. The British were faster and cheaper, which was what everyone looked for in this time because it was the Industrial Revolution. Everyone was all about making things more efficient. So Alfonso de Albuquerque forced people to buy safe conduct passes to journey across the sea. So it was basically like insurance that they were going to get to the place that they went without being hurt or killed, which, although it seemed smart at the time, wasn't really fair to the people because they should have been promised that anyway. The Dutch and English established parallel trading posts, which gave them lots of power, and the Spanish taxed a little too much, and tax burden became an issue. So basically, in this whole thing with your safe conduct insurance and your efficiency, all these countries started coming together and butting heads over who was going to trade with who.
The Qing dynasty hooked onto opium by illegally transporting it from India to China in exchange for Chinese products. This then led up to the First Opium War, in which the British won and they gained trading rights within the Qing dynasty. The Second Opium War then occurred, in which Britain and France won and gained more influence within the Chinese dynasty. The rebellion was a rebellion that was created to cast foreign influences out of China. Increasing questions about political authority and growing nationalism contributed to the Boxer Rebellion because people began to realize the weakness of the Qing dynasty after the Opium Wars and the influence that Western powers had over the Qing dynasty. Let's go on a little trip to Britain. So here in Britain, you can see life is pretty good, employment rate is high, they have tons of coal, and they can pretty much bully anyone into doing anything they want. In addition, they have all the advanced technology. Increasing discontent with imperial rule propelled reformist and revolutionary acts through the uprisings of upset peasants and the effects of agricultural decreases. Increasing discontent with imperial rule propelled reformist and revolutionary acts through the uprisings of upset peasants and the effects of agricultural decreases.
Hey Dee, so you've been getting some serious business lately. Not only are you the basis of pretty much every party in a little girl's life, but you're basically what England and China are known for today. Good for you. So tea is supposed to be a way of comforting people and healing sickness, but no, you eventually had such a huge tax in America that you started wars and revolutions. People threw you into the sea. And for what? Wasting perfectly good tea to make a point? You know what? We never said history made sense. That's a metaphor. And not only that, you're one of the #1 exports for China. You and Silk brought in some serious cash. So good job. You started revolutions. You brought in a profit. Add that to your resume. This tastes nothing like a yogurt-covered pretzel. You'd think industrialization could do better. So anyway, I'm back. Yay. Sorry about the little blackout. So, rapid increase in productivity caused by industrial production, like the yogurt-covered pretzels, yay, influenced the British and French in their attempts to open up China. Basically, what happened was this rapid increase allowed more of China's desirable goods, such as tea, to be shipped into Britain and France. But Britain and France weren't really satisfied. So what they did next was a huge turning point. They started to illegally ship opium to China, which everyone got hooked on. This eventually started the Opium Wars, in which the British were able to surround the Chinese using their coastal cities. The Treaty of Nanking was soon developed, in which the Chinese had to open up their markets for major trading cities. And the British eventually won the Opium Wars, so even though getting the Chinese hooked on drugs wasn't exactly the best way to win the war, it somehow worked for the British, because they're the British, like the Mongols. So the British and French had their rapid increases in productivity, opened up the Chinese markets. Overall, it worked to their benefit, and not the Chinese. Because now the Chinese are left without opium, and they have to share all the glory with Britain and France. Yay, industrialization. All right, so back to business here. Around the same time, Chinese people responded to the development and the global spread of capitalism in a pretty negative way. They weren't too happy because in their minds, it was the Chinese way or the highway. Neo-Confucianism. So the Qing dynasty was pretty much opposed to capitalism. Farming and weaving were considered the ideal activities and professions in the Chinese social order. So basically, if you did either of those two things, you were on top for life. When China started withdrawing from trade, they removed themselves from capitalist opportunities. And when this happened and little bits of capitalism became apparent in the government or in political order, they would make sure that all that would just be cut out, because Chinese way or the highway, once again. Because earlier China made so many discoveries and had so much development, this set the precursor for Qing China to withdraw from advancing any further. They didn't have to do a whole lot from this point forward because they saw themselves as kind of ahead of the rest of the world. They had everything they needed, they were self-sustainable, but the Chinese just didn't like capitalism. They wouldn't do any favors for the capitalists or the people of the upper class because it helped the Europeans and gave them a voice in the government, which they didn't want them to have. Thanks for watching.